Alright, Unification Part 2. So, the previous episode was mostly the setup, honestly. Hadn't gotten into the weeds of talking to Spock on Romulus about what Spock is trying to accomplish with the unification efforts. And that's where things get interesting, is because this one starts getting into the politics of what's going on with the Romulans and what Spock is specifically trying to do, because previously we only had the big picture look at it. Now we're getting into the nuts and bolts of it. Which specific Romulans is Spock working with? What is he getting each of those specific Romulans to try and do? And eventually we end up with Sela being like, well, actually, I'm going to take all of you prisoner and kick you out of Romulan space. Bye-bye! And the Romulans actually decide to conceal their... they decide that their invasion of Vulcan is going to fail, so they scrub the mission and blow up the ships that they were sending as an invasion force, which supposedly kills over 2,000 Romulans in the process. We don't really get a whole lot of explanation for that. And that, of course, ends up with the final note from Spock that true reunification will happen only from the Romulans and Vulcans interacting with each other on a personal level. Anyways, there's actually quite a few other things in this episode, though, because this actually goes pretty heavily into the weeds on the differences between Romulans and Vulcans in terms of, how they split apart into different groups. And that fits with how I referred to Unification Part 1 as a world-building episode. This episode keeps on going with that, and that one gets a lot of play in this. Like, they start establishing various Romulan political figures, like Proconsul Neural, and stuff like that, where they are setting things up that will later be used in DS9. TNG doesn't play with Romulan internal politics the way that DS9 did, but the writers of DS9 went all in playing with Romulan politics because they were doing the whole, Powers of the Alpha Quadrant Alliance thing, where the Federation had to convince the Romulans to be their allies while fighting the Dominion War, and get the Romulans and Klingons to work together in order to fight the Dominion War. Yeah, when that came up, a whole lot of things from Unification got reused. And honestly, when you look at Unification from not a specific Federation versus Romulan story and take the basic structure of how Unification presented the Romulans and apply it to a different race, well, I mean, I made a separate video talking about the Qatarians. Well, a lot of what we currently know about Romulans was established in Unification. Because prior to Unification, no one had seen Romulus. Ever. However many decades of time people had spent looking at Romulans in the various TV series prior to this, hadn't even seen Romulus. And the vast majority of what various series had shown about the Romulans was just one or two Romulan ship captains doing things, and that was about it. And while it did talk about things like the Kittimer Massacre in earlier TNG episodes, and also the fact that the Romulans had decided to go into an isolation mode where they've refused to talk to the Federation for years, that was basically just like big picture things, like, and not something that was showing specific people, places, or things. It was mentioning that a big battle happened, or mentioning that they aren't doing anything. Not what are they doing instead. And this episode went heavy into the what are the Romulans doing right now, by taking people to Romulus and talking to the Romulans. That changed things a lot. And if you wanted to do the big picture version of this with a different race, that would be an interesting thing for a TTRPG campaign. It's like, you want to establish X race as a major player in your story. This doesn't mean that this race needs to be a big a player on the galactic stage. Nah. If your story is not a tale of war on a galactic scale, you don't need to establish a race as being a big player in order to be relevant to your story. So, again, going back to the Qatarians, because they're an easy example, because I talked about them recently. No one ever looked at Qatarians in this amount of detail. Ever. They got used multiple times in different TV series. You had a specific Qatarian character who showed up in dozens of episodes. And yet, no one ever looked at Qatarian culture or whatever in the level of detail that this one episode showed us about the Romulans. And that, that's the sort of thing that really makes a race memorable, is seeing them as people in everyday life. Which, yes, actually, this episode does give us slice of life on Romulus, showing what Romulans do when they're not shooting at the Federation. And that is something that was amazing to see. And one of the things that made this episode so good, you just connect to the Romulans as a people in a way that you can't when you're angrily shouting at them over subspace radio because you're planning on shooting them. Doesn't work the same way. And that is what made this what it was. What else is there? Oh yeah, also, this has a lot of the like Quailor 2 stuff too. It's like there's several different aspects of the Quailor 2 stuff that are just weird. It's like you had this four-armed alien playing the piano with all four arms simultaneously. Huh. A lot of interesting side things. Because, again, it's like they needed something more than just Picard talking to Spock on Romulus for the story. And the actual, like, perceived danger in Unification parts 1 and 2 was that plot of Sela trying to invade Vulcan and finding out that, oh yeah, that's right, the Romulans needed to steal a whole bunch of Federation stuff to make the invasion work, and when it failed, they just scrubbed the mission and left. And, well, oh yeah, also Ferengi were involved. And also random aliens, too. Who are they? I don't know. Oh yeah, what's the Berolian freighter? Okay, it's like this is one of those episodes that, as a part of the whole lore building thing, they just throw out a whole bunch of things that are kind of sort of uh, like confetti. It's like, oh, it's this guy in this solar system over here who we've never mentioned before. Who are the Berolians? I don't know. Where do the Berolians live? Somewhere near enough to Romulan territory that they'd regularly trade with the Romulans. And the trade route passes by Galorndon Corp. Yeah, that Galorndon Corp. The one from the episode where Geordi and that Romulan guy get stranded there and forced to work together or die. That Galorndon Corp. Don't know anything else. Again, though, world building, setup. So you're not going in depth into things because you're introducing new things. And Unification introduced so many new things, along with taking an in-depth look at the Romulans that had never been done before. And part of the reason why Romulans ended up being such a persistent race in later works is that they went really, really in depth into looking at them. And that is something that you could play with really heavily in a TTRPG. All right. Well, see you guys later.